Greetings. Welcome to the second Kidney Action Week session of the day. And it's been a great day so far. Hope you've all been enjoying learning and connecting with people from all around the country. My name is Kurt Campbell. I'm a professor of medicine, vice chair for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and director of the nephrology fellowship program at Mount Sinai in New York City. I participate in clinical trials and I lead an NIH-funded research program focused mainly on rare kidney disease, especially those that are protein spilling. So it's my pleasure to moderate this session focused on clinical trials and why your participation is needed. I have the pleasure today of being joined by Dr. Glenn Chertow, Dr. Jean Charleston, and Ms. Allison Rasher, who will provide their insights on clinical trials. So let's first get into some introductions of our distinguished speakers. So Dr. Glenn Chertow is a professor of medicine and epidemiology and public health at Stanford University School of Medicine. Dr. Chertow has developed and maintained a very robust clinical research program and leadership roles in many important clinical trials that have led to advances in management of complex nephrology disorders. So he's had work sponsored by the National Institute of Digestive Diabetes and Kidney Disease, as well as the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Dr. Chertow is a past recipient of the American Kidney Fund's Clinical Scientist Award, and he's now serving on the program selection committee. Welcome, Dr. Chertow. Dr. Jean Charleston is a faculty member at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health, as well as the School of Medicine and the School of Nursing. She has over 20 years of experience conducting clinical trials, mainly in the cardiovascular space, with an emphasis on community-based recruitment and staff training, which is very essential, and we'll be touching on that. Dr. Charleston's expertise has been recognized nationally and internationally. She's been a consultant to the NIH, assisting in enhancing recruitment of underrepresented minority participants in clinical trials. Welcome, Dr. Charleston. And Ms. Allison Rasher is joining us from a caregiver perspective. She's the parent of an 8-year-old son who was diagnosed with cystinuria, which is a rare genetic kidney disease. And while caring for her son, Ms. Rasher and her family learned the importance of engaging with the medical team to learn about clinical trial opportunities, being very important advocates for her son's health. So we'll be hearing a lot from her. Welcome, Ms. Rasher. So throughout the session, we'll be answering your questions about clinical trials. And of course, we have the perspective of a nephrologist, study manager, a caregiver. And before we get started, I just want to encourage all of you, wherever you are, to be engaged in the conversation. We will have a question and answer session at the end, but you don't have to wait for the end. You can drop your comments in the window right next to or below the Facebook live stream, or in the chat box if you're on the Kidney Action Week website. So we'll really try to answer as many questions as possible. So without further ado, let's get started. And Drs. Chertow and Charleston, we'll start off with just a few overview slides to start the discussion off. So I turn this over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Campbell, and it's a pleasure to see you again, Dr. Charleston. It's been a while. I don't know. Are we sharing the slides, or are the slides being placed? There we go. There we go. So, Dr. Charleston, why don't I let you get started?
Could you make my slide a little larger? I'm going to just talk about what are clinical trials. But clinical research is medical research that involves people and is all the heart of medical advances. It's how we've been able to get so many medical advances is because of doing clinical research. Clinical trials look at new ways to prevent, detect, or treat diseases. Clinical trials can study new drugs, new ways of doing surgery, new medical devices, new methods for existing treatments, new ways to change behaviors to improve health, as well as ways to improve the quality of life for people with acute or chronic illnesses. So why should you participate in a clinical trial? Well, people participate for different reasons. Some take part to help others and contribute to the advancement of medicine. Some people who have an illness or disease may take part to help others, but also to possibly receive the newest treatments. People may experience the same disease differently. Clinical trials must include people with a variety of characteristics such as race, age, sex, and sexual orientation. Many years ago, when they were starting doing clinical trials, it was primarily white men that participated. They did not have women, they did not have people of color, but things have changed. And so we now really try to include in all our trials a variety of characteristics, as I just said. Next slide. So the different types of trials. There's what's called a prevention trial, searches for better ways to prevent a disease. In fact, the very first study that I worked with was called the Trials of Hypertension Prevention. And it was a study to see if we could prevent people from developing hypertension. And we did find out that sodium reduction and weight loss were the best ways in helping to reduce the risk of developing high blood pressure. We're still working on getting the message out and that people with their diets and with their exercise and things like that. So there's prevention trials, there's screening trials, and that search for new ways for detecting diseases. There's diagnostic trials, compare tests or procedures for diagnosing diseases. There are treatment trials, test new treatments. Behavioral trials compare new ways to promote behavioral changes designed to improve health. And last but best of all, I think, is the quality of life trials, to explore ways to improve the quality of life for people with conditions or illnesses. Next slide. So when we look at clinical trials, they are 5 phases. The phase 1 is to test a drug or treatment in a small group of people, usually around 20 to 80 people for the first time. It helps researchers learn about safety and side effects. This phase usually tests for several months. Then there's what's called the phase 2, and these test a new drug or treatment to a larger group of people, roughly 100 to 300. The phase can test for a few months up to 2 years. Phase 3 is a new drug or treatment is given to a large group of people, it's usually 1,000 to 3,000, to confirm its effectiveness. This phase can last for 3 years. And the last, and I'm sorry I started saying there were 4 phases, which I know there is, but the 4th phase is after a drug is approved by the FDA, researchers track for safety in the all the population using that drug. I've been involved mostly in the later phases of studies, but they're all important.
Dr. Chertow, do you have that was an excellent overview of clinical trials, Dr. Charleston. Thanks so much for that. Dr. Chertow, I don't know if you had any input on the general overview and the intro, just as we set the foundation for the discussion.
Well, yes, thank you very much. First of all, I'm really pleased to get to see Dr. Charleston again, and extremely pleased that Ms. Rasher is here with us. I think it's extremely important to have caregivers and trial participants themselves participating in these types of educational activities. And I have to say, I am now currently a caregiver of a patient in a clinical trial. So I'm not in kidney disease, but it's a very different perspective. I think the one clarification point I might make is that as the phases are really structured for new therapies, new medications, more so than devices or strategies or behavioral interventions. But it's important to think about what the objectives are for each of those phases. So in phase one, typically phase one trials are conducted on healthy volunteers to make sure that the administration of a particular compound is safe, or as safe as can be determined in a short-term study. Phase two is extremely important, and that's usually the first time that drugs are used in the population that's targeted. So, for instance, in our case, perhaps a patient with a form of glomerular disease or kidney disease, where a phase two trial would not be given, the drug would not be given necessarily to healthy volunteers, but rather to people who have the disease. And the major purposes of the phase two, that second phase, is to also evaluate safety of the medication and to make sure that the investigators and the patients have the right dose, because we don't want to give too much or too little. And the phase two studies typically arrive at a dose that, assuming that the drug is safe and might have some signal toward efficacy or effectiveness, meaning that it seems to work for the purpose that it's being designed. You can exit phase two knowing what the dose is that you're going to test in the much larger study that Dr. Charlson described as phase three. And the phase three trials are the trials that ultimately are most carefully scrutinized and evaluated by regulatory agencies like the FDA or the US Food and Drug Administration. And their charge is to make sure that any new drugs that come to market that might be available to patients are safe, or at least safe enough to warrant use in the particular condition. So for instance, there may be some side effects, but if those side effects are considered to be reasonable given a serious underlying condition like kidney disease or cancer, even some side effects might be tolerable. And those phase three studies are the ones that are used by the agencies to really determine whether a drug will become available for use in practice.
Thanks so much, Dr. Charto. Yes, certainly the risk-benefit analysis has to be carefully weighed. I think this would be a good opportunity to hear from Ms. Rasher. As a parent, of course, you supported your son through clinical trials. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose to participate, any lessons learned from the process?
Sure. Just to back up a little bit, excuse me, my son was diagnosed 3 years ago with cystinuria, which is a rare genetic kidney disorder. And, you know, when he presented, it was one of these dramatic mornings where he woke up, his stomach hurt, vomiting uncontrollably, went to the pediatrician's office, and first guess was that it was his appendix. Took him to the hospital and pretty dramatically and quickly learned that he was in kidney failure because one kidney was no longer functioning. The remaining kidney was blocked by a cystine stone. So having no knowledge that we even carried the gene for this disease, my husband and I were thrust into this, you know, pretty dramatic emotional tale of a child. He was treated at a children's hospital locally in our area, where they only had 3 children with this disease. So not a whole lot of information. We found that we had to quickly get up to speed as his parents and his caregivers to learn as much as we could. I mean, baseline, I know the esteemed doctors on this Zoom meeting, you know, we had to become like Google nephrologists in a really quick amount of time to understand everything about the disease. So literally, we spent many, many hours poring over the internet, trying to learn what hospitals were doing, you know, different things. Some of the different doctors that, you know, maybe we did go get second opinions and third opinions about his diagnosis. And finally, my husband stumbled upon a study that was published at another hospital. He sent an email. He scrolled all the ways down to the bottom of the article, found the name of that doctor, searched at that research hospital, and sent him an email and shared our son's story. And with that, that physician got back to us and said, obviously, that study was closed. It had, you know, been completed, but they were going to have another one in the future for children. So that's how we literally stumbled upon it. I had gone so far as I had found a couple of studies in Europe. I had gone so far right before COVID shut everything down. We all got passports in our family because I thought, hey, if there's a chance that someone would be willing to follow him through his kidney journey overseas, we will take it. So I think anyone who's a parent knows that, you know, desperate times call for desperate measures, and you try to become the best advocate you can for your child. So that's how we found the study that our son is in now, literally scouring the internet and reaching out and sending emails. And I want to say we're very blessed and lucked out that they were doing a second study and we were able to get into it.
No, thanks so much for sharing that. I mean, certainly highlights the challenges, right, in the rare disease space and rare kidney disease space in particular, making the right diagnosis and the benefit of clinical trial participation, right, for clinical management, right, where you know, state-of-the-art approved treatment options may not always be available. So really, thank you for sharing that. Dr. Charleston, I wanted to come back, just given your vast experience in this area. Can you tell us a little bit about your work in clinical trials and your interests, really about best practices for reaching minority populations and underserved groups?
One of the things that I've tried to do, which I think is so important, is to educate people as you interact with them, but also that they begin to trust you if you are honest with them. I think honesty is just so important. One of the things that, not that people weren't honest before, but I think sometimes they may not always say exactly what would be involved, but now we no longer we don't do it for many reasons, but we do have review boards, institutional review boards that review all of the protocols and what we're doing in trying to recruit individuals for our studies. I'm very active in the community. I attend like our local, we're located, I'm actually off campus. I'm out in a suburb of Baltimore, about 10 miles from Johns Hopkins Hospital. But I've gotten involved in the community. People know me. And there's like a little local newspaper that I help to contribute articles, and we may do advertising for some of the studies that I'm trying to recruit for. The other thing that I've done, which I think has helped in recruiting minorities too, is to do screenings. Like that first study, we just were doing blood pressures all over. And if we found people that met our eligibility criteria, we would then pull them to the side and talk to them about the study. But we had that first eye-to-eye contact with them, which I think was very helpful. And then, of course, we followed them through. That they got to see my staff and myself and to get to know us. One of the studies that has really been, I hate to say one of my favorites, but it was, a mother should never say one's more favorite than others. All my studies are certainly important to me and are favorite, but there's one called the African American Study of Kidney Disease and Hypertension, the ASK trial. And one of the things that the very first participant said to me, he didn't really think twice about being in the study. And I said, oh, why? What made you? Because I thought, you know, we'd had people say, why are you doing this study? It's only for African Americans and you're not including anyone else. But certainly we have a high incidence of kidney disease in the African American community. And that was one of the primary reasons why we were doing it. But this first participant said that he was doing it for he had a twin brother, and that his twin brother had chronic kidney disease. And so he said that he was doing the study for himself and for his brother. And for the community at large. And he was certainly a wonderful participant. And he would talk to potential people that were thinking about getting in the study and tell them about his experiences. So I think, you know, trying to develop some type of relationship with the community is helpful. And that they know that it's real, that you're not just doing it to get them in your study, that you really do care about them and care about the community and care about the disease that they may be suffering from or that we possibly are trying to treat.
Thanks so much. Yes, definitely very important to maintain those community connections and a patient-centered approach. Thanks so much for sharing that. So, Dr. Chertoff, from your perspective, why is diversity in clinical trials important?
Well, I think that diversity in clinical trials is extremely important for many of the reasons that Dr. Charleston mentioned in the introductory slide. We really want to make sure that any results that come out of the trial are not, we often talk about safety and efficacy or effectiveness, meaning, is it safe, reasonably safe enough, and is it effective, is it helpful? But we also often think about a term called generalizability, meaning, does it apply to all people or just a small fraction of the population? And so it's extremely important when we're evaluating new treatments to make sure that the results are generalizable. In other words, if a treatment were very effective in young people but hadn't been tested in older people, then we wouldn't know whether it was necessarily safe and effective in older people. So we would want to make sure that the trial had a broad range of age inclusion. And I think for the same reason, we need to think about making sure that there's broad representation of clinical trial participants that match the communities that we serve. I think there are some really important issues that some of which Dr. Charleston touched on, and I think the key word that she used was honesty. And that's not to suggest that those of us who conduct clinical trials are ever dishonest. But I think being honest and forthright and really explaining things in detail to all people so that they understand the purposes of the trial is extremely important. And we have to recognize that persons from certain cultural backgrounds and cultural groups might be less trusting of the, or more trusting or less trusting of the healthcare system for a variety of reasons. And so I think I really like the case example that Dr. Charleston gave of the particular participant who basically participated for others. It is true that clinical trial participation may be of benefit to the patient, him or herself. And I think, as you heard from Dr. Rasher or Ms. Rasher, she may be almost a doctor at this point. But she was aiming to participate in large part because of concerns about her son, and I'm sure also for deep concerns about other families facing similar problems. Generally, we can never guarantee that a patient who participates or a person who participates in a clinical trial is going to benefit him or herself. But the knowledge that we gain will benefit many other people. And I have repeatedly been struck by how generous and altruistic people are generally with their participation in clinical trials. The participants who are most passionate and the ones who are most enthusiastic about participating are the ones who are really participating to help the next generation of patients who share similar conditions. And that's just inspiring. And I think it's also important that we communicate that should be the principal motivation, as opposed to an expectation that they might benefit themselves, although they might. And I think it's really important to inform, but not to scare people. And I think when it comes to kidney disease trials, it's extremely important to have broad representation by race and ethnicity, because African Americans in particular experience a much higher rate of progressive kidney disease. So I think we need, without scaring our patients, we need to inform them that patients with kidney disease who have African American background are at higher risk of developing kidney failure. So it's extremely important that we have African American patients represented in kidney disease clinical trials.
Yeah, thanks so much. Definitely very wise words. We want our trial demographics to mirror like the disease prevalence and demographics of the patients that we care for ultimately. So thanks so much. So just a comment, for those who are just joining us, welcome to our session, Clinical Trials, Why Your Participation is Important. Just a reminder, you can enter your questions via the Facebook Live stream or in the chat box if you're joining on the Kidney Action Week website. So transitioning a bit again, Dr. Charleston, can you speak a little bit to some of the barriers to full participation from patients from underrepresented groups that you've encountered? I think, we've seen a chart up earlier just regarding the disproportionately low numbers, right, of patients from underrepresented groups who are actually enrolled in trials. What are some of the barriers that you've encountered?
Well, I think one of the primary ones that's already been said is distrust. And, many people have heard about the Tuskegee study, and I think that's one. And a lot of people don't, it was a terrible study that was done, but I think one thing I want to really clear up, and that a lot of people don't realize it, was that they did not give these men the syphilis, okay? These were men, African-American men, about 399, who already had syphilis. And then they had what they call their control group of about 200 men that did not have syphilis. And unfortunately, they didn't treat those that had the syphilis. They continued to watch them for years to be able to see what would happen if someone did developed the syphilis and living with it. Can you enlarge my slide a little bit? But I think back in those days, we did not have the review boards that we have now, and that there is a lot of things that we can do to prevent them from doing such a study like that. But I think another barrier is just the lack of comfort knowing about clinical trials. People don't know anything about it, and they don't understand really the importance of it. I think the other thing is the time and resources. Like, I know when I did the ASK study, we had a test we had to do with the participants that they really had to take off a day of work because it took about 6 hours sometimes to do it. And so it was hard if someone had a job where they didn't have vacation and sick days, and that if they participated, they were going to lose a day's work. So one of the things that I did in that study was that we did Saturday clinics, and we did compensate. We gave monetary compensation for them to do take that day to do the test, and that we were able to recruit people of color. Of course, the whole study was for African Americans, the kidney disease one that I've been talking about. But I think the other thing too is when you have, we would get them together, like we would do social events that they could bring their families, and also just get to know other people that were in the study. This was before HIPAA. But it was something that really, they talked about it to their family, their friends, and that helped to get the word out in the community that the study that was being done was a good one, and that there was honesty, as I had said before. So I think one of the key things is that mistrust, and that we have to work on and be honest about what we're saying to people to gain people's trust. That's important. But as I said, I think that it does help being out there in the community, that people see you too. When you do the type of studies that I do, most of mine are just community-based studies. And so I am recruiting from the community in Baltimore and surrounding areas. And I've tried to accommodate people the best that I can, like doing Saturday clinics. I also, in one of my studies, we had people that were of Jewish religion, and that Saturday was their Sabbath. But what we ended up doing was that we did clinics on Sundays, so that we were able to accommodate them. So I think when people see that you're going to these resources and trying to find ways to accommodate them, people, it does help, I think, with them looking at you again and saying, oh, maybe this isn't so bad. And the other thing is we try to always educate. We put together a booklet when we did the ASK study all about kidney disease and risk factors, and it was a way for them to understand what their condition was and what we were trying to do, and they shared that with their family and friends. So I think, again, the key is the mistrust, but we can get around that if we are honest with people.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing that. And Dr. Chertow, as Dr. Charleston mentioned, there's certainly an increasing move towards making trials more patient-centric, empowering patients in their decision-making. Can you speak to some of those efforts to kind of break down some of these barriers to participation?
Certainly. I think another important point is that our team of investigators and our team of study coordinators, be they nurses or other professionals, should also look like the community that we serve. So I think it's extremely important that we make sure, and I know all of us are working hard to do this, that at our research institutions that we develop the careers of healthcare professionals, be they physicians or nurses or dietitians, physician assistants, etc., who are from groups traditionally underrepresented in medicine. And not only does having diverse teams improve the research team in many, many ways, but it also sends the right message to potential participants that we are a diverse team of professionals and we're looking to enroll and follow carefully a diverse group of participants. Another thing that I think we and many other institutions, I know you've done this at Mount Sinai, that I think the approach has become much more patient-centric, not only for research, but even for clinical care. So I think 20 years ago, research-oriented physicians and other care providers would basically be physically located at the main campus, whether it's Johns Hopkins or Mount Sinai or Stanford or any other academic institution. And I directed our division of nephrology for over 13 years. And one of our initiatives was to bring the clinicians into the communities that serve the patients. So I provide direct patient care, and like Dr. Charleston, in the community of providers and the community of patients who have very different backgrounds than mine. And I've encouraged several of our other faculty members to practice in outreach sites so that we are actually providing care within the participants' communities, and we are known entities to the care providers in the communities. And we don't have this foolish expectation that people can come or want to come to the central location where, not only they have to take a day off from work, but they might have to pay $10 or $15 to park their car and $10 or $15 for a sandwich at the cafeteria. So I think we have done many things, and I believe this is a growing trend at all research institutions around the country to really diversify not only our staff, but also our locations of practice and research work so that we can make it more reachable to people in the community who may not have, single mom doesn't have the time to take a day off and come to a central hub, and might have a much easier time going to a community clinic where a branch of the research project could be stationed.
Thanks so much. Yes, definitely important to make the studies more accessible, right, to patients, bringing it closer to their locations. And I think the FDA has put out some guidance, right, on increasing accessibility and inclusiveness in trial enrollment. So really thanks for that. So Ms. Rasher, I just wanted to also get your take on the personal experience that you had, right, on trial participation. I think a lot of folks who've never been in a study may not fully understand and appreciate the frequency of checkups, the level of care and attention that's provided, and how that may be a bit different, right, from normal clinical care. So could you speak to the experience that you and your family had, right, participating in the trial of Assisting Maria?
Sure, and kind of to follow up with what Dr. Chertow was saying, we have the exact experience where we're here on the East Coast. The clinical trial that my son is in is on the West Coast. We have never been to that hospital. everything, and this is where some of the beauty of clinical trials is, because we made that connection and then our son was accepted into this clinical trial, his care is still maintained by our home hospital-based nephrologist and urologist. But the study itself, the doctor out in California works with our nephrologist here in the Washington, D.C. area for everything that he needs. So we actually, it's a blessing. We're able to take him to where he's comfortable back at our home hospital for all of his blood work, for his scans, for everything. And then that information is shared back with the nephrologist out in California. Another benefit of that is when, in the last couple of years, we have had issues arise with his health. We now feel, we have a partnership now with researchers out in California. So our nephrologist here is able to call him, email him and say, hey, this is what's going on. Do you have any recommendation? Because I think an important thing to note when you have a child with a rare kidney disease or a rare disease in general, nephrologists aren't, they can't really be experts on every disease of the kidney. There's only so much time. There's only, they have so many patients that they're dealing with. And as I mentioned earlier, our son is only one of 3 at the hospital where he's treated that has this disease. And every child is different. So to be able to have that network with other nephrologists around the country, and now with this clinical trial, it is an added measure of information flow. She can reach out to him and say, this is what's going on. He can look at his, study participants and say, this is, a trend we're finding, whatever the case may be. But it's just another level of information sharing and knowledge that can really help. And I think another benefit just, for our son in general, because he's such a young age, you can only tell your kids so many times, you have to drink this much water, you gotta keep hydrating, you can't lower that, to make him an active participant in his care. And I think a clinical trial also helps with that. It helps him understand, hey, this isn't just for me. This is also for other children who may be diagnosed in years to come, to help them find the best medicines, to help, find the best treatment plans. And he's young, but he's aware of that. He understands that he's already lost one kidney because we didn't know anything about this, but this is helping him hopefully preserve the remaining kidney and hopefully also help other children down the line who are diagnosed with this disease to keep both those kidneys and to be able to live a long and healthy life, which I think is the purpose of these clinical trials. As was mentioned earlier, it's not always for the one that's in it on that given day. It's for people down the line. And, it's a wonderful situation to be in, to know that you're helping potentially your child, but you're also helping other people's children.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to follow up as well, because you certainly have a unique experience, Mr. Asher, because as we know, children under 18 cannot provide informed consent, right? So there's an assent process. How did you sort of go about explaining the trial to your son, and just the experience around that ongoing process of a minor assenting, right, to the trial participation?
So when it came to, obviously when it comes to all the consent forms and all that, that was, myself and my husband. And, you will find in clinical trials, you have a point person who goes through all of those documents with you. In our situation, as I'm sure you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think at any time, if we're not comfortable, he can be removed from the study. That's, not a problem. In terms of, our son understanding it all, we went through it all. I printed out the forms. I showed them to him. He has 2 older brothers. I showed them to his brothers, because I think it's all, knowledge is power, and educating the entire family on something that's going on, it can be worthwhile for each one of us with our own health and wellness as we get older. So he was fully aware, you know, this may be a couple more blood draws. This may be, you know, some more urine tests than you're used to. And he, you know, I have to say, he was okay with it. He feels very confident that he's doing something good for himself, for other people. And, you know, I think that consent, you know, take it very seriously. You know, make sure you read through everything. It can be overwhelming, but there's always an advocate for you in the study that will go over all the documentation. And, you know, I felt very confident about it all. It's all very well presented and very well organized. So I think, you know, when you're in them, you'll feel secure knowing that you're being taken care of, and it's very professional and it's very equitable and all that.
Yeah, thanks so much. And you're absolutely right. The consent can be withdrawn at any time, right? It's definitely a patient-centered enrollment approach. So we do have a few questions from the audience that have come in. And, you know, one is there a clinical trial risk for African Americans with high blood pressure, right? So just around the risk of trial participation, and I'll sort of modify that trial opportunities, right? Specifically enrolling African American patients with hypertension. So, Dr. Chertow, we may start with you.
Well, currently, I'm not aware of a specific blood pressure clinical trial. Although that doesn't mean that there isn't one. And I think one of the points on an earlier slide that Dr. Charleston went over briefly is one of the barriers is access to information. And so there are definitely places to look for clinical trials. I think in hypertension, one might look to the National Kidney Foundation or the American Heart Association, and might be able to search for possible clinical trials. There's a website which is called clinicaltrials.gov, which lists most, if not all, clinical trials that are being conducted in the United States and globally. So as far as learning about access, there are ways of accessing that information. And I think clinicaltrials.gov is a good place to start. And some of the patient-focused professional organizations like the American Heart Association, the National Kidney Foundation, of course, the American Kidney Fund. I should have listed them first. As far as specific risks, I think one of the advantages of participating in a clinical trial is that, for instance, if someone were participating in, let's just say, a cancer clinical trial, because of the frequency and the thoroughness of evaluation, one might actually have his or her another health issue discovered that might otherwise go undetected. So I think in general, the risks of participating in a clinical trial, and specifically for something like hypertension or diabetes or something, a common condition that requires detection, that participating in the clinical trial may make it more likely that one of those common conditions is detected as opposed to, you know, going undetected over an extended period of time. And I should emphasize that there are safeguards through the committees that Dr. Charleston mentioned, the institutional review boards, which are sometimes referred to as ethics committees, that review the inclusion and exclusion criteria of clinical trials, which basically means who is considered eligible and who is considered ineligible. So, for instance, in a kidney disease trial, a person with extremely high blood pressure might not be deemed eligible because it might be considered by the Institutional Review Board and the investigators that control of the blood pressure is the most important immediate issue that needs attention before considering enrolling in the clinical trials. So there might, for instance, be a contingency that patients would be eligible, but only if their blood pressures fell within a particular range that's deemed to be safe.
Thanks so much. Certainly, there are very detailed criteria for enrollment to minimize the risk for these agents being tested prior to approval. And this kind of is a nice segue to another question that I'll pose to Dr. Charleston. It's really getting again to how thorough the screening process is for enrollment and how much consideration is given to the medical history, prescribed medications, potential drug-drug interactions with the study agent. How do we know, right, that a patient is appropriate, and how can they feel confident, right, that the risk of participation would be lower than the benefits that they would potentially derive from being in the study?
Well, most studies, we have to do what we call screening visits. I personally like to do at least 3 screening visits. And that's before someone is actually in the study. So what we do is to look at all the factors that you're talking about. We do blood work, we do a urinalysis, we get their medical history, what medications they're on. And so all of that is looked at to see if they would be eligible. Of course, we wouldn't want to take someone who maybe, as what was said earlier about with a very extremely high blood pressure that really needs to be in treatment, and that the study wouldn't be able to help them. And we certainly would let people know about that. But we use that time, those visits, to go over all of those things to make sure that they are going to be eligible to participate in the study. And that we certainly will let them know if they're not, if it's something that puts them at risk, we're going to certainly let them know. We are going to let them know. And so usually after the 3 visits I do what I call my randomization visit or their enrollment visit. Prior to all this, I usually put together something, everything you wanted to know about, ask what was afraid to ask, but about the different study, about the study itself. And we try to put the language in this, what you would need to know, that's in the consent form, but to put it in everyday language. And we go over all that. So we give people a lot of time to really understand and get the knowledge of their what they're going to be participating in. Now, I know everyone, all sites don't do this, but I do know that they try their best to have the potential participant as knowledgeable about the study and about their condition and what's going on. That certainly is tried to do. But we do, as I said, blood work, urinalysis, things to be able to determine if someone is eligible to participate and that it's going to be safe for them to participate in the study. The one question, I don't know of any hypertension studies per se, but I have a study I'm recruiting for right now, but it's for people that have diabetes and hypertension, and we're looking at a diet to see about lowering their blood pressure as well as improving their diabetes, their blood sugars, and their cholesterol levels. But I'm located in Baltimore, and you have to live near here to be able to do that study. But as we should really use the clinicaltrials.gov as the best place to find a study that you might want to try out for.
Yeah, thanks so much. And that really was another question of how people find out about clinical trials and where they're located. So we heard about clinicaltrials.gov, really an excellent resource, and one of the ways that we communicate with practicing physicians, right? So they're aware of all the trials that are available and open to enrollment. So, and I think we're approaching the top of the hour. I just wanted to give our distinguished panel an opportunity to share some takeaway points, right? Just some lessons for the audience. Start with you, Ms. Rasher. What would you have as a takeaway message?
Sure. I would just say, you need to be your own advocate. You need to, partner with your physician and see what advice they can offer you, and then do your research. Clinicaltrials.gov. I believe that's how my husband first found the study that's going on in California. I mean, it's the best defense is knowledge, and use all your resources and reach out, and it's a great feeling to know that you are helping either yourself or your child in our situation, and then others in the process.
Thanks so much. And how about you, Dr. Charleston?
Yeah, well, one, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity just to talk about clinical trials. It's something that is very near and dear to my heart. I truly believe in and love doing clinical trials. One of the things is that you most of the time will get the state of the art of medicine and be right on the cutting edge, which can be very beneficial to an individual. But I think, as was said, that, get as knowledgeable as you can about the clinical trials. And just by watching this, you've done the first step to get into clinical trials, which is very important. That is the way that we're going to progress medically, and that you would be helping yourself, others, and future generations too. So thank you.
Thanks so much. And Dr. Chertow?
Thank you very much. I have to say I've been inspired by my co-participants and by you, Dr. Campbell, as a moderator. You definitely have a second career as an MC. But I also, I am regularly inspired by the contributions that the patients themselves and their families make in participating in clinical trials. And I think those of us who work on clinical trials on the field's behalf repay that generosity and try to repay that generosity as best as we can. So I would just encourage people to keep the lines of communication open, to learn more, to ask lots of questions, and to continue to inspire us and work hard to make healthcare much better and health better in the coming generations. We've seen immense advancements in a number of fields. Nephrology has been crawling along. It's made some advancements. I think the field is ready really to make major advances in the coming 10 to 20 to 30 years. And it's going to require these clinical trials and lots of generous, inspiring participants over the next decades.
Yeah, thanks so much. So Dr. Chertow, Dr. Charleston, and Ms. Rasher, really enormous thanks for spending time with us. Valuable information shared about clinical trials, and there's so many in the kidney space, and it's important that we share this info with the public. So looking forward to bringing you back for more chats. So with that said, that is a wrap for the live sessions for today. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone at home for joining us for the first day of Kidney Action Week, and we hope you had a great day learning and engaging with us. If you're eager for more Kidney Action Week content, stay tuned for a kidney-friendly dessert demonstration airing at 5:05 p.m. And in case you missed it, there'll be a rebroadcast of the first session, Home Dialysis, What to Know and What to Ask, at 5:30 Eastern Time. So as we conclude, you'll see a poll for a quick survey appearing below the screen. And please take a few minutes to fill that out and tell us how we did, because your feedback will be very useful as we plan future sessions. So for more details on tomorrow's events, please check the Kidney Action Week agenda. And if you aren't already follow us on Facebook and send us an email through kidneyfund.org. And you'll be the first to hear about our resources like this. So thanks again and have a great day.